In the summer of 1859, the United States and Great Britain, two powerful nations armed with muskets, cannons, and warships, stood on the brink of war. The cause? Not gold, not empire, not ideology. A pig. Yes, a single pig. The setting: San Juan Islands, to understand how a farm animal almost triggered an international conflict. We need to start with geography. Between Vancouver Island, claimed by Britain, and mainland Washington, claimed by the U.S., sits the San Juan Islands, a cluster of forested islands, rich in farmland and strategic for shipping routes. Both nations wanted them. The 1846 Oregon Treaty was supposed to settle the border between the U.S. and British Canada. It drew the line through the middle of the channel between Vancouver Island and the mainland. But here's the problem. There were two channels: the Haro Strait to the west and Rosario Strait to the east. The treaty didn't specify which one. That ambiguity left the San Juan Islands in limbo. Were they American or British? Nobody knew, so both sides moved in. The pig and the potatoes. By the 1850s, Americans had begun settling the San Juans, while Britain's Hudson's Bay Company ran a sheep farm on the island. Tensions were simmering but manageable. Then came June 15th, 1859. An American farmer named Lyman Cutlar noticed a pig rooting through his potato patch. Not for the first time. Either, this pig had been raiding his crops repeatedly. Fed up, Cutlar grabbed his rifle, took aim, and shot the pig dead. The pig, it turned out, belonged to Charles Griffin, an Irish employee of the Hudson's Bay Company. And Griffin was furious. Cutlar offered to pay 10 in compensation. Griffin demanded 100. The two men argued bitterly, and Griffin threatened to have Cutlar arrested by British authorities. And just like that, one dead pig became the spark for an international standoff. From pig to powder keg, the American settlers rallied around Cutlar, furious at the idea of British officials threatening one of their own. They demanded protection from Washington territory. The British authorities, meanwhile, insisted that since the San Juans were theirs, they had the right to arrest Cutlar and enforce law. In an instant, the island's long-simmering border dispute boiled over. One farmer's potato patch had become a flashpoint for empire. The U.S. responds when news reached General William Harney, commander of the U.S. Army's Department of Oregon. He saw an opportunity. Harney was a staunch expansionist, eager to assert American power in the Pacific Northwest. Without consulting Washington, he ordered a company of soldiers to San Juan Island. In July 1859, 66 American troops under Captain George Pickett, yes, the same Pickett who would later lead the disastrous Pickett Charge at Gettysburg, landed on the island. Pickett raised the American flag and declared that no British authority would enforce law on American soil. The British were outraged. Governor James Douglas of Vancouver Island dispatched 3 warships under Captain Jeffrey Hornby to San Juan. Suddenly, the tiny island was crawling with U.S. soldiers on land and British Marines at sea. What began as a farmer's squabble now looked like the start of another Anglo-American war. Remember, the War of 1812 wasn't that far in the past. Both sides still carried grudges, and neither wanted to appear weak. A standoff over a pig by August, the situation was absurd. On one side, nearly 500 American soldiers dug in with cannons and rifles. On the other, 3 British warships with more than 2,000 Marines floated offshore. The commanders faced each other warily. Both sides prepared for battle, and yet nobody fired a shot. Except, of course, the one that killed the pig. The standoff dragged on for weeks. Soldiers traded insults, not bullets. Officers met politely to negotiate, then returned to their camps to glare across the island. All this over one pig. Closing of Section 1. So, by late 1859, the United States and Britain were literally on the verge of war over a dead farm animal. Troops faced off, cannons pointed at each other, warships lined the shore, all while the farmers of San Juan nervously watched, wondering if their potato patch was about to become a battlefield. In Section 2, we'll see how this ridiculous standoff ended, how cooler heads prevailed, how Kaiser Wilhelm of Germany got involved, and how the Pig War officially went down in history as the strangest war nobody fought. Because sometimes, history doesn't hinge on kings or generals. Sometimes it hinges on a pig in the wrong potato patch. By August 1859, San Juan Island looked like a powder keg. American troops with rifles and cannons faced down British warships bristling with guns. One misstep could have triggered a shooting war between the United States and the British Empire. And yet, no one pulled the trigger. Orders to hold fire Captain George Pickett, the fiery U.S. officer who planted the stars and stripes, was itching for a fight. But higher up the chain of command, cooler heads realized how absurd this all was. President James Buchanan, already dealing with growing tensions that would soon explode into the American Civil War, wanted no part of a transatlantic conflict over a pig. The British Admiralty, meanwhile, ordered restraint. Governor James Douglas wanted to teach the Americans a lesson, but his admirals refused to start a war over potatoes. Both sides quietly instructed their men, hold your fire. And so the war settled into a farcical stalemate. The pig in question, while soldiers and sailors glared at each other, the pig's death remained unresolved. Charles Griffin, the British farmer who owned the pig, demanded compensation. Lyman Cutlar, the American farmer who shot it, offered 10. About the price of a hog, Griffin insisted on 100, claiming his pig was special. The U.S. Army stood behind Cutlar. The Hudson's Bay Company backed Griffin. The two empires, in other words, were arguing over how much one pig was worth. Life in the camps for the soldiers. The standoff turned oddly civil. American and British troops occasionally visited each other's camps, sharing meals, swapping stories, and joking about their bizarre situation. One American soldier wrote that the British treated them more like neighbors than enemies. British sailors teased the Americans about defending potato patches with cannons. It was, in the strangest sense, a friendly war. A war that fizzled months past. Neither side wanted to back down, but neither wanted bloodshed. Eventually, both agreed to a joint military occupation of the island until the boundary dispute could be formally resolved. American and British camps coexisted peacefully for more than a decade. The so-called Pig War never escalated beyond tense stares, shared dinners, and one unlucky pig. Enter Kaiser Wilhelm. The border issue remained unresolved until 1872, when both nations agreed to international arbitration. They turned to an unlikely referee, Kaiser Wilhelm I of Germany. The Kaiser appointed a panel of experts who studied maps, treaties, and reports. After long deliberation, they ruled in favor of the United States. The Harrow Strait would be the official boundary, and the San Juan Islands would belong to America. The decision was accepted peacefully. The British withdrew their troops. The Americans stayed, and the Pig War ended, not with a treaty signed at gunpoint, but with a German emperor playing referee. The final tally. So what was the cost of the Pig War? Casualties: 1 pig. Human deaths: 0. Ammunition expended: none. Years of tension: more than a decade. It remains one of the only wars in history where the only fatality was livestock. Legacy and laughter over time. The Pig War became a favorite story of historians and comedians alike. Americans celebrated it as proof of level-headed diplomacy. The British chuckled at the absurdity. Today, the San Juan Islands commemorate the event with Pig War reenactments, where actors in 19th-century uniforms stand around potato patches and pretend to argue. The site of the joint occupation is preserved as a U.S. national park, where visitors can see the American camp and British camp standing side by side, a reminder of a war that never really happened. The bigger picture: on one hand, the Pig War is funny. Two empires nearly fought over a farm animal. On the other hand, it shows how fragile peace can be. One shot, one rash decision, could have dragged Britain and America into a bloody conflict. Instead, both sides stepped back, laughed at themselves, and chose compromise, which is probably why the Pig War is remembered not as a tragedy, but as one of history's strangest comedies. Closing of Section 2, so here's the final verdict. In 1859, the United States and Britain almost went to war over a pig. Troops and warships faced off, cannons were aimed, and tempers flared. But in the end, nobody died except the pig. And maybe that's why the pig war endures. It's a reminder that sometimes history isn't written in blood and glory. Sometimes it's written in farce, and a potato patch with one very